I'm George Alagiah. Welcome to this Frontline Club discussion on Zimbabwe. Let me just very quickly introduce our panel. Patrick Smith, I'm sure known to some of you, Africa Confidential, and reported from the region recently during the elections. So that's Patrick here. Laura Lynch, CBC correspondent, radio correspondent, and had the distinction of being one of the few accredited journalists inside the country. We'll find out whether that was a help or a hindrance in a minute. You've heard that Tererai is going to be late, but standing in is Guguletu Moyo, a lawyer. Thank you for doing that. And of course, in Zimbabwe, we've got Catherine Philp, who's the Times diplomatic correspondent. Let me just tell you very, very quickly what I think will happen this evening. Firstly, it's a pleasure for me to do it. I have a very personal interest in Zimbabwe. It was the first place I went to as a foreign correspondent in prehistory, a very, very long time ago. Our first son was born in Zimbabwe, and so I've seen a country that was very much seen as a model in the 80s, a model for what the rest of Africa might look like, indeed what South Africa might look like, and to have watched it now is, to use that rather overworked word, something of a tragedy. So that's my personal interest in it. What I want to do today is, first we'll get our panelists to just say a couple of minutes each, probably 2-3 minutes, about their latest observations on what's going on in the country, and then just so that you can start thinking about how you want to contribute to the discussion. And of course, at the front line, that's really what the point is to get all of you involved. But the kinds of things we want to look at is, firstly, how this whole Zimbabwe episode has reflected on President Thabo Mbeki of South Africa. We've noticed these comments coming from Jacob Zuma and the party, the ANC. There's a distinction apparently between Mbeki and his party. There's this whole this arms shipment, the Chinese arms shipment, which has been turned away certainly by the South Africans. Not entirely clear what's happening to it now, but that represents, I think, in many people's minds, something new in this. And then also to look at the MDC itself, the opposition, and see what kind of opposition it's been, and whether it's handling the aftermath of the elections in the way it should. So let me start with Patrick, and a few minutes on your latest observations. Patrick.
Yeah, well, many of you, if you're journalists, would have seen the president of the ANC, Jacob Zuma, address the great and good of the business community, and some of us hacks afterwards at Simpsons in the Strand this morning. And it was quite remarkable to see him and Matthews Poser stand up, who's the secretary, rather the Treasury Secretary of the ANC, stand up and condemn the arms shipment to Zimbabwe, wholeheartedly endorsed the dock workers' action against the shipment, and indeed Levi Mwanamwasa's, the Zambian president's follow-on, saying that all countries within the Southern African Development Community should also block that shipment. And I think that it's one of those great moments, I think, in this saga. It's a key moment because it's the first time that SADC has come out into the open, under pressure from the trades unionists in the region, as it happens, and the civil society organizations, and made a stand against the Zimbabwe government. So I think it's a very important moment. I mean, the latest I've heard about the shipment, I spoke to the International Transport Workers Federation this afternoon, and they're tracking it quite closely. And what they say is that it's still west of South African coastline, out of South African territorial waters, and still steaming north. And they suspect it's still heading for Angolan waters, perhaps to Lobito or perhaps onto Luanda. They have had, the Transport Workers Union, that is, have had an assurance from the Angolan dock workers that they will join with the action already taken by dock workers all over Southern Africa. That's Mozambique and Namibia and South Africa, that they will in fact stop and refuse to load it, unload the shipment. So I think it's going to go on for quite a while, this saga.
Okay. All right. What I'd like to do now is go to Zimbabwe and talk to Catherine. Catherine, I'm not sure if you heard, that was Patrick Smith talking about this arms shipment, this boat. Did you hear any of that?
Yes, I did.
Okay. I'm interested in how the Zimbabwean press, such as it is, whether it's reporting this arms shipment and how it's reporting it.
Well, I mean, as you're probably aware, there wasn't much of a free press left here. The state media, the Herald newspaper, the state broadcaster, who really are the mouthpiece of the regime. There are various papers that are printed in South Africa that make their way in here. I suppose you call opposition newspapers, and they're there to reflect the views that are not with the government. And they've been reporting it very much as the international press have. They've tended to carry reports from the major agencies. They've reprinted reports from American and British newspapers too. I think it's actually caused some excitement amongst opposition supporters that there should have been this reaction to trying to stop the shipment.
Okay, we're having a slight difficulty hearing you, but we'll persevere, Catherine. We might certainly come back to you later. What about the situation on the ground now? I was down there in the region, 2-3 weeks ago, I guess, along with hundreds of other people. We've all, most of us at any rate, have pulled out, and predictably enough, there's less reporting of it. What would you say is the latest situation there?
What, in terms of reporting it as a journalist, or in terms of what's actually happening on the ground?
No, what's happening on the ground?
Okay. I think we're seeing escalating violence, mostly in rural areas. It's extremely difficult for journalists to access, which is another reason. It's not just that there aren't many of us here, it's hard to get to. It's changing in nature. It's being perpetrated, first of all, by militias, by the so-called war veterans, by the youth militias. But we're seeing a slight change in some areas where people who've moved into those areas, thanks to the land resettlement policies, themselves are getting co-opted and pressurized by the security services or by ZANU-PF officials themselves to take part in the violence. And there's been reports of actually them being handed lists of people to go and attack and harass in order to try and disable the opposition's ability to work.
One other thing, Catherine, I gather that the Herald yesterday was reported to have had, I think it was an editorial floating the idea of some kind of transitional government of national unity. Where did that come from, and is that the latest thinking?
It's got a lot of confusion here. It's very, very unclear. It's not even clear if the byline on it was, in fact, a genuine name. It may, in fact, have been an official in ZANU-PF. I think that the convincing prevailing theory is that this was a way of testing out an idea and seeing what kind of reception it got. That would suggest to us that maybe the government aren't that sure about their next move, and they are actually trying to put some feelers out and work out how they might go forward with this. The problem is that despite this just fairly horrendous kind of intimidation that you're seeing in the countryside, it's not clear that even that could persuade people or frighten people into voting against ZANU-PF. I have personally interviewed some opposition activists who've been horribly injured and who've said that this is just making me more determined. I will rather get killed because this is the last time, the last chance we have. So the thinking behind that national unity government piece was really to close down the runoff that ZANU-PF seemed so keen on at first, and not have it at all, and keep Mugabe at the top of this government, whoever has been it. So I think we're just looking at a government that's actually not entirely sure about how to proceed and is keeping all its options open, but looking for ways to buy time, because if you cancel this runoff and you wrote a new constitution as that piece proposed, you'd be looking at maybe months more of this limbo.
All right, Catherine, thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, Laura, your few minutes, and in particular, I think it'd be interesting to know what it was like when you were there reporting.
Yeah, obviously I'm the odd person out in this crowd of journalists being actually allowed to come in, being given a letter to come into the country. Believe me, we had to fight to get that. Initially, we were told that we weren't going to be allowed in. In fact, myself and my television colleagues had traveled up to the border. On the Thursday before the election, we got communication from the Canadian ambassador inside Zimbabwe saying that she had actually personally pressed our case and that we were going to get in. We went and traveled through the night to arrive there on Friday, and we paid $1,800 US a piece to get our accreditation, which was the one price of being able to report legally inside Zimbabwe. And there was one other condition attached to our entry, and that is that we were explicitly told not to request an interview with the president. And that was it. Beyond that, we were allowed to go about and do our business. So in the ensuing days, that's what we did. We went out on election day. We found an empty field that was apparently full of people who were registered to vote. An empty field. And there was a small house that had 75 voters registered to vote there. And we were able to do that story freely. We had people yell at us about doing it, but we were able to go ahead and pursue that story. But as the days went on, we had more and more trouble, and much more for my television colleagues. A television camera attracts a lot more attention than a radio microphone. And so how I found out about this trouble was I would get text messages from my television colleagues with one word, help. They had been taken down to the police station one day for filming in an area that people didn't want them filming in. We had to go down there. We had to get them out of the police station, but they were never actually arrested. In the coming days, we went to another area where we really weren't wanted, and that situation got quite a bit more dangerous because there were ZANU-PF sympathizers there who we later found out believed that we were white farmers coming to take the land back. And in that case, the only way we got extracted from the situation is that we had a government official who happened to be in the neighborhood come by and get us out of there and make it look like he was going to kick us out of the country. He wasn't going to do that, but he actually helped us out, which showed that there were some people inside Zimbabwe who were with the government who were actually sympathetic to what we were trying to do as journalists. There was one other incident where my colleague was taken in for simply filming in the street. Again, when we got down to the police station, the police told the young officers who took her in that they had no right to take her in because she was legally there and she could do whatever she wanted because she had the badge. So yes, we were harassed, but I think we had a lot easier time than most of the unaccredited journalists in being able to do our jobs, in being able to talk to people on the street. It was an unusual thing for me to actually be able to speak to people freely and get them to talk to me. And in those first few days after the election, I noticed a real change. I've been to Zimbabwe 3 times. And what I noticed this time in the days after the election was a sea change in people's mentality. They were willing to talk. I actually had people coming up to me and saying, I want to be interviewed. I want to tell you what I think. That had never happened before. People had been terrified in public for. Unfortunately, in the days following that, and I fear now, that window is closed. People have become silent and intimidated once again.
Guguletu, I know you've stepped in at the last minute, but I wonder if you've got a few words for us.
I think, you know, the remark you made right at the beginning about, you know, Zimbabwe being held up as a model, you know, in the 80s was quite interesting to me, certainly in terms of what is going on right now. I think one of the things that was not reported very well was what happened in Matabeleland Matabeleland and other areas, but mainly in Matabeleland in the 1980s. You know, the campaign of violence against people who were perceived to be opposition there, and you know, according to the estimates, you know, thousands of people, up to 20,000, 30,000 people died during that campaign. So, for me, that gives you an understanding of what is possible with ZANU-PF and what might be going on right now. And again, a lot of that violence took place in the rural areas, and there were no journalists there. It was very difficult for journalists to report that. And when I spoke to Tererai just now, he was saying that today they were receiving reports that there are people who are having their hands cut off, and you know, very serious reports of violence. And we've heard similar things as the International Bar Association. We've been hearing reports of you know, very serious violence. One of the things I think that you know, people would have read about is a statement from church leaders who said, you know, there's a genocide taking place here. might not be genocide in the legal sense of the word, but I think what they meant, and I think that these are people who wouldn't use that word lightly. What they were saying was, what is going on here is very serious and we need intervention. And I think the sad thing is that so far there's been a lot of condemnation, but no action. One of the things that we've seen in the past, and this is the curious thing about ZANU-PF, is that even though they do a lot of terrible things, they're still very concerned with looking proper, particularly being seen to abide by the law, even those unjust laws. And I think that the international response has been quite weak in the sense that they could push them further on the law. They could send people to Zimbabwe right now so that there's an international presence. When Rambatsuna happened in 2005, the UN envoy went in.
Clear out.
Yes, that was the clear out campaign where houses were destroyed and that sort of thing. The UN envoy went into the country and that stopped. That campaign stopped. The government was very keen to explain that we were just cleaning up and we're going to rebuild these houses and so on. And I think an international intervention at this point would be very useful. So it was very good to see Mr. Zuma this morning and saying we condemn the violence absolutely. And one of the things that I find interesting is with the response to Zuma is that, a lot of people, journalists particularly, have asked, well, what do you think his motive is? Is he trying to show up Mbeki? And I think at last you have somebody who says what we wanted Mbeki to say all along, and people now ask, why is he saying it? Surely whatever he's saying, it's right that he ought to be saying it. It doesn't make sense that anybody else wouldn't be saying that sort of thing. So I welcome that. But I think that still, something further needs to be done. And the interesting thing is that I think leaders now from Africa, from the United Kingdom, from the United States, I'm told Jendai Fraser is going to be in South Africa and she will be raising Zimbabwe, are openly being seen to be talking about Zimbabwe, which is a difference. Mugabe survived for a very long time on this illusion that, Africa was very supportive of him. But I think that the African leaders were annoyed, first of all, when he didn't turn up at SADC, but also are now very embarrassed by this.
You say the African leaders were very annoyed, but apart from this shipment thing, which is actually a bunch of union workers who really kicked it off, what have the African leaders said? I mean, even Zuma, when he was given the opportunity, can everyone hear me? Even Zuma, is this working? No. Let me shout. Even Zuma, Jacob Zuma, when he was asked on radio this morning, I think it was, on Radio 4, didn't really get round to condemning Robert Mugabe in the way in which you're suggesting. I'm actually going to also move this on slightly, because the one thing none of you has talked about is the MDC. We talked about shipment, we've talked about what people outside are doing. What's the MDC doing, Patrick?
Yeah, well, there was an incredible wave of support. Obviously, is this working? No. Okay. This one?
No?
No.
I'm afraid I'm quite good at shouting. Green one is working. Okay, right, yeah. Well, I mean, that was one of the interesting things about the election, that it was very much... ZANU was running against the economy. It wasn't actually running against all opposition. I mean, I think it was everywhere you went in the country in that election period, people would tell you what was wrong with the government, what was wrong with the economy, and what was wrong with their own lives as a result, rather than what was right with Tererai, Makoni, or Mutambara, or the opposition in general. And the feeling was just, it was anyone but ZANU. That was the overwhelming notion that you got. And I think it's only now that people are beginning to, as we're talking, there's this dialogue, conversation about some sort of government power-sharing operation. People are trying to work out what that could possibly work out to be. I think there are big issues, obviously, within the opposition. They went into the election divided into three groups. Then Arthur Mutambara teamed up with Simba Makoni. A lot of people still refused to take Makoni seriously. They felt that as a kind of a ZANU retread, he was involved in some strange political game, maybe with Mugabe or Mnangagwa or somebody else, trying to divide the opposition vote. Certainly did divide the opposition vote a little bit in the urban areas. So I think there's.
Are you suggesting that Makoni then? Are you suggesting that Makoni is then an opposition figure in his own right, and that those fears that he was there simply as a stooge, really, if you like, for ZANU, were wrong? You trust him?
I know him a little. Well, I know him a fair bit over the years. I'd say that he's not a sort of barnstorming politician. He's a sort of pretty pallid technocrat. But I think to take the moves, to make the moves that he did, required a degree of political courage, and I think he went out there. I think he went out there as a genuine candidate, and I think he's helped move the politics on.
All right, Catherine, since you're still there with us, hopefully listening to all of this, what do you make of what the MDC has been doing in the last few weeks since the election? I mean, does it? I was talking to someone earlier, and we're wondering, does it have a plan B? I mean, it was very good at kind of opposition. It was very good about saying the elections were rigged. But what is its plan B?
Well, I'm not even sure it ever had a plan A. I've seen the MDC make so many missteps since this election. You really do start to wonder who's advising these people. For example, when Morgan Tsvangirai came out and told us all that he'd won and he'd won with more than 50% of the vote, he immediately said, but of course we will have a runoff if that's what the government insists. And it was as if he was throwing down the gauntlet. And people in Zimbabwe were kind of stunned by this. They expected or hoped that if he really could prove that he had victory, if he had the results on the sheets, he would stand up and say, no, I'm sorry, this is my crown, I've won it. Not say, I'll play your game. And something that you heard over and over again was the MDC are behaving like this is a normal country, like this is a normal, fair electoral system and political system. So I think there's been a lot, of statements that have ended up having to be reversed. He then said, oh, we won't compete in this runoff. That they can't seem to decide what environment they're operating in here. So statements get retracted, which I think undermines their credibility over and over again. On the flip side, I would say that the MDC are in a very difficult position domestically. I think that the way that the intimidation is working, the security services, the militias, means that it's very, very difficult for them to operate within the country or fight back in any way, in any not effective, non-violent way, and not having media outlets, not having any of that apparatus, makes it very difficult. But what you are beginning to hear now in Zimbabwe is increasing criticism of the fact that the leaders, MDC leaders, are not in the country and haven't been since the election.
We had the same frustration in trying to cover this election and trying to put... Is that working? Okay. Closer. In trying to put the opposition to account for the way it was acting in the wake of the elections. And I would just say, I was actually in Zimbabwe just before the elections and interviewed Morgan Tsvangirai then, and he told me, and this was just weeks before the elections, that he wasn't going to contest those elections. Lo and behold, he comes around and decides to fight the elections. Goes through the election process, and the days after, as Catherine said, you keep getting different answers from them on whether they're going to contest a runoff, whether they accept the results of the election. Critics inside Zimbabwe will tell you that this is a weak opposition, this is a fractured opposition, which is all the more amazing given that there is so little reason for the opposition to be anything but united against someone like Robert Mugabe. But they have benefited over the years from the fact that the media coverage has been so critical of Mugabe, and obviously for good reason, without much examination of what the opposition really stands for. All the opposition had to do, in essence, was stand against something, not stand for anything. Now they are being really put to the test to see what they could mount as a government, what they can mount as an opposition now, and I don't think that they're showing up particularly well right now. They're not doing the best job of being an opposition that can move something forward. That being said, it's very difficult for Morgan Tsvangirai to come out and say, rise up, go out into the streets and fight, because he knows he has a people that could be heavily victimized. They already are being victimized within their own country. So he's playing a very delicate game here outside the country. At some point, he's going to have to show his hand, get back in there and fight in the trenches.
Gugaleta, do you think he's being sensible being out of the country. I mean, we just heard Catherine saying that he needs to get back in there. But if the game at the moment is to get international pressure, which is what you were suggesting earlier, perhaps it makes sense for him to be outside.
You know, he's achieved a lot while he's been out of the country, but I think that
like what specifically?
you know, the movement Zuma, for instance, it was after he met Zuma that he came out with a fairly strong statement on Zimbabwe. He of course went to SADC, and he's been to Ghana. He's met with President Kikwete, and I understand that they are, you know, really trying to do something about the situation. But I would think this is somebody who's ready to form a government. He must have, you know, foreign policy advisors. He must have a foreign minister in waiting who could do some of this. So he doesn't need to do it himself. And, you know, the sense, if you speak to people on the ground, if you read some of the blogs, people are saying, you know, Morgan Tsvangirai ought to be here. I certainly think, you know, I was in Zimbabwe in 2002 when they lost another election, or another election was stolen from them. At that time I was doing legal work for the MDC, and I remember being in Bulawayo, you know, soon after that election result was announced. The leadership of the MDC were in Harare. People were waiting to hear from them what was happening. They were palpably angry, you know, about that result and wanted to do something, but they heard nothing. And, you know, the government press reports something else. So and I think this is a problem, that he's not there. And his you know, they're members of parliament. They're people who won seats in this thing. Why haven't they gone back to their people and said, you know, this is what we're doing? You know, ZANU-PF only banned the rallies about 2 weeks after the election. But for a while, they could actually go out and meet. And for a while, ZANU-PF didn't know what to do. But they didn't do any of this. Last Friday was Independence Day. Mugabe had a rally in Hatfield, in, you know, an opposition stronghold. You know, and the people who turn up for that rally actually go for a football match, which is held after that rally. It's, you know, it's very popular, and so people go there. And you know, the MDC and Mugabe just wants a crowd. You know, they don't discriminate when it comes to who goes in there. The MDC could have gone there and confronted Mugabe right there. I don't believe that the police would have shot at everybody while Mugabe and his you know, leaders were there. You know, another, you know, missed opportunity.
Are you agreeing with them, with Catherine, that the MDC has been wrong-footed?
Yes, you know, they need to keep people informed, you know, because all people get is what is in the Herald, what is on ZBC. They're not hearing from the MDC. Even, you know, MDC members of parliament aren't hearing from Tsvangirai and Tendai Biti. They complain that, you know, everything that happens in the party must go through Tendai Biti and particularly Tendai Biti, and you can't always find him, so things don't happen. You know, and you know, they themselves, you know, if you speak to MDC MPs who are in Bulawayo, they don't know what's going on, and I think this is a shortcoming of the MDC.
All right. Before I open it out, I just want to get, Patrick, your reaction to something Catherine told us. This editorial, I think it was, or leader anyway, in the Herald. What are your impeccable sources telling you is going on with that?
Well, I think it very much was a trial balloon, and I think the key thing about it is the proposal is for Comrade Mugabe to lead the transitional arrangement, which would then, as I understand it, is to then go into a fresh round of elections. So basically, you're just saying, well, you know, we got the wrong result this time, so let's try it again. And I think, you know, what everyone's just been saying about the condition of the MDC and their own tactical acuity and so on, doesn't lead you to believe that they're going to join in a government with ZANU-PF and get the better of them as they prepare for another round of elections. So you're not really going to get into a realistic set of proposals that way. But I think there is a lot of sense in some sort of power-sharing government, national transitional government, definitely, looking at the Constitution, looking at the judiciary, looking at electoral commission and so forth. And all those things need to be tackled before there's a runoff. I think a runoff under these conditions would be completely pointless. So I think you do need to get that. But I don't see that the incumbent should chair it. I think, you know, you need to find a figure in many eminent Zimbabweans around the world to come in and play that role as presider over that government, and then perhaps the winner of the parliamentary election should have a role as head of government, but have a head of state from sort of the Zimbabwean diaspora.
Just one thing about that editorial in the Herald. I think those who sort of got very excited about it probably didn't read the Herald. There was a story done by McDonald Zeruto, who writes for Reuters, and he said, this was a Herald editorial. It was something written by a columnist who writes for the Herald, and we don't know whether, of course, that is a nom de plume or not. And yesterday, Bright Matonga gave an interview where he said that idea was discussed in the Politburo, and we dispensed with that a long time ago. We dismissed that idea, no unity government. And today in the Herald, there's another opinion piece which makes the opposite argument, that no unity government, the opposition is stewed and whatever the terms that they use and so on. So I'm not sure what's going on, but I think there are many ideas within ZANU-PF. They don't all say the same thing, and this could be just different sides of ZANU-PF.
Okay, let's get your opinions. Now, just a reminder of the kinds of things that we can talk about. I mean, the reaction of the African countries, which you talked about earlier, the whole Mbeki Zuma thing, and South Africa's role. We've got the arms shipment and talk about an arms embargo, pressure for that. Reporting styles, how well the whole thing has been reported or how badly, and also the MDC. So.
I want you to make 2 points. The first point is around the MDC. I think that all of these discussions about next steps and how useless they are and so on, and I can agree with some of it. But what we're getting into all is that the MDC is one election. And then where do we go from there? That's not the question which is being asked. The question which is being asked is we are in a limbo, and where do we go from the limbo? And for me that sort of is a bit strange. However bad a party wins an election in this country or in South Africa or somewhere else is, you start from that they won an election and then they will be allowed to form a government. And the second point I wanted to make is around the international response. Having been working on Zimbabwe for a long time, I think we are sort of, when we are criticizing the current international response, we're forgetting very much where we come from. Because we have had a situation where the NDC has been almost barred from meeting any presidents, any governments around Africa at all. So to use the opportunity now to for the first time have the possibility to speak directly to African governments, I think is quite unique. With the exception of Ghana and Senegal, I think that you have had a situation where Tsvangirai had almost no opportunities to speak to any African government. Most of the MDC people that had access to some African governments.
You seem to be suggesting that some people are saying MDC didn't win or that they're not being clear. I haven't heard anybody say this is a limbo. Just repeat that point for me and as briefly as you can, because I think people are pretty clear about what happened in the election. And you have Gordon Brown saying the election was stolen. I mean, who's talking about a limbo?
I feel if anybody's heard him recently, he's been hedging his bets. He hasn't been come out clear on the brutality that's happening in Zimbabwe.
Yes.
He's definitely been hedging his bets to this sort of surge of popularity that he seems to be experiencing. I think it's caused. And the other thing, I think, when you talk about the international community, they should be putting pressure on the frontline states to come out and say the criminality that is being committed now in Zimbabwe, that's ejected.
Do you want to respond to that?
Jacob Zuma has been clear on the violence. I don't know, I suppose people would like to put words in his mouth, but he has condemned the violence. He's actually the first South African leader that I've heard speak directly on the violence. The other leaders say, there are allegations, but, and so on. So I think that he has been clear on the violence. And Matthew's poster was also very clear this morning. In fact, he said, Mugabe stole an election. So I think that's new coming from South African leaders.
Yep. On the international community's response, what you're saying that they should be calling on the frontline states to condemn, that that's a double-edged sword. If you start getting United Kingdom, the United States, these other international powers coming out so loudly and forcefully. It provides fuel to Mugabe to criticize those as being outsiders and to criticize Africa, and African nations will come together and rally around that. What you were talking about, the sliver of an illusion, how you work with the international community in a way that becomes more constructive. Perhaps what the international community seems to be doing now, which is working more quietly through diplomatic back channels, might be more effective than coming out and with...
Well, okay, before I come to you, sir, I mean, I actually have a query with the premise of that question, which in some ways actually can be seen as rather patronising, that somehow it's up to Europeans and Americans to be pressuring the front states. These are a people, you use the term frontline states. Let's remember where that term comes from. It comes from a group of countries who said what was going on in South Africa is not good enough and we're going to try and stop it. You know, why should anybody be pressuring them? They should be pressurising the rest of the world to do something about it, don't you think?
Well, look, firstly on the ship. I mean, the situation of the ship is still off the western coast of South Africa. It doesn't have enough fuel to turn around and go back to South Africa. And the Chinese, as far as I understand it, both directly from them and from the Transport Workers Federation, have not said emphatically it's going back to China. They're saying that if there are no alternative arrangements, it's likely to go back to China. So I think that it's still heading towards Angola. And it's probably now up to the Angolan dock workers and the International Transport Federation to sort it out, to come to some deal to allow it to refuel and then go back to China after that. But I think it's a huge issue. I mean, it's a very symbolic issue that the SADC states for once have moved together to block this shipment. I think it's potentially...
on your second point, sorry, I was a bit distracted, but why hasn't the MDC published?
Oh, they did. They did. Yeah.
No, they did. That's why they kept having news conferences and they kept saying we won. Because that's what they used. They used those numbers that were outside those polling stations, and this was the greatest flaw in ZANU-PF's whole election strategy, that they agreed to that constitutional change that allowed those results to be posted outside polling stations so the public could see, and the independent election monitors could see, and the opposition could see what the count was in every polling station, and they went and they added it up. And it looks like MDC's numbers, which they didn't say were total numbers, but were projections based on what they could observe, agreed with those of the independent monitoring group, Zimbabwe Election Support Network, that showed in both cases that Tsvangirai either won just shy of a majority or a simple majority, which was enough to avoid a runoff. But the thing is, you're right, the world still hasn't seen the official numbers from the Zimbabwe Election Commission, and they're recounting votes already.
Tererai, welcome. hot from SW Radio.
Good evening, everyone. Sorry I'm late, but I hate this town. You know, anything could happen. Dying to get back to Zimbabwe, but old Bob won't leave. What could I say? Just as I was leaving, I was working on violence today. You know, we have a staff of 4 on our news team, so you're constantly doing just about every story that comes by. And I was on my way out when stories came in that they've had to open up treatment centers on the borders on the Musina side of South Africa and in Mozambique. And today came reports that people have started showing up as of yesterday with their hands chopped off. Now, I'm sorry, but this is extremely disturbing. I'm a journalist, and you can remain neutral and objective to a point before things start to affect you. People are calling in and saying they've had their hands dipped in hot oil after they are asked by soldiers which one is your voting hand. The reports of violence are extremely disturbing, and if you meet anyone who says, or like Patrick Chinamasa said on TV on SAPC the other day, that there is no violence, it's a blatant lie. I mean, you've seen the pictures. I speak to these people every single day. The guys in Murewa were hiding and staying in groups and sleeping in each other's houses, protecting each other for over a week. When they were calling me at midnight, they would send texts to my phone. Names are being dropped of who's responsible. This is people like the health minister, David Parirenyatwa, shutting down a town, Murewa Town Center, and herding everyone to a community hall to tell them that they better vote the right way the next time. It's disturbing. This is a health minister who's supposed to be you know, taking care of people, the citizens. But it seems that they've abrogated their duty, those who are supposed to protect Zimbabweans, and it's disturbing. I mean, that's about all I want to say in terms of the view and the information that I'm getting as a reporter. Right now, it's very disturbing on the ground. It seems to be all we're getting right now are violence reports, and it's all over the country. There are people who seem to be relishing this and enjoying it. You know, you get your diehard ZANU-PF thugs who know our website or who have a couple of phone numbers that they got a hold of, and they'll call and tell you how they're beating up people, that kind of stuff. And that's not pleasant. People are being used to hurt each other by Mugabe, and I think it needs to stop.
Thank you very much, and rather depressing that was too. Any more questions? Yeah.
I want to ask, you know, since people are being beaten in the rural areas, what the panel would think, I mean, I know this is a bit kind of history considered, so perhaps the question is not valid, but about if Morgan Tsvangirai brought people out in the streets to say, I won the election, because, I mean, people are dying, being injured anyway.
Okay.
That's one point.
Let's just stick with one, actually, for the moment. Sorry. Because this is interesting, isn't it? I mean, when we talked earlier about, and Catherine made this point about the MDC, whether it had a plan B, she said it didn't have a plan A even. Is bringing the people out in the streets a realistic option?
I sort of already stated this, but my impression is that they have been so beaten down that to get them to rise up out in the streets would take an awful lot. Maybe Tsvangirai saying so could do it, but there is a great risk in that, and that they would end up being more beaten down, more brutally attacked than they have been already. That would be my grave concern with anything like that. I don't know what you...
Let's just start with Patrick. Any views on that?
Well, I think there are these moments. Google called it a Ceausescu moment for Zimbabwe, and there was a Ceausescu moment back in 2002. The Commonwealth were there. They just declared the election invalid. All the African Union observers were there, and they just declared the election valid. But never mind that. The Southern African Parliamentary Association was there. They just declared the election fraudulent. And I think there was a moment when the MDC could have then gone on the streets and really they would have had that effect. Now it's a very difficult judgment. But I mean, what a lot of people within the MDC are saying, it's not even up for discussion. There's no structure of organisation between ourselves and the unions to do such a thing. And certainly it's not up for open discussion. And it's very difficult to make the judgment. Tsvangirai has always said, when asked this, said he's not in the business of sending people out to die. However, people are dying, as you're describing at the moment, in this current round of violence and in previous rounds of violence. Maybe they're going to be pushed into doing it, whether they want to or not.
I was just going to... Catherine, can you still hear us?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you may not have heard the question, but the question was whether the population, the Zimbabwean people, could be brought into the equation, whether the MDC could bring them out onto the streets, and what that judgment would entail.
I think you're talking about two separate issues. Firstly, one, whether the MDC is prepared to do that, and if it has capacity to do that. The second, would people respond to such a call? I mean, there are millions of people missing from this country, and they're people of a certain age, perhaps of a certain disposition. Someone said to me, you know, if you can't get bread in this country, people don't go out and have bread racks on the street. They go over the border to find the bread. And just huge numbers of people have left this country, and they may be the very same people who might have been angry enough, or who simply might have been strong enough to stand up. People here are tired, they're exhausted, they've seen their hopes dashed several times before after each of these elections. They've seen their trust in Morgan Tsvangirai also falter because he hasn't stood up and claimed victory any of the past times. You hear it again and again, he's going to flake on us again. People couldn't even support a strike that they tried to pull here. Yes, it was partly because it was very hard to get word out when you don't control any media, when you have no outlets to get your message out. But someone tried there. There was no proper coordination with the trade unions. But when it came down to it, most people don't have a proper job, and most people couldn't afford to take a day off work to strike. It's the situation you're dealing with here. It's where people are struggling to get enough to eat. I don't see those people rising up. And there is also just, when you're in a country and you feel that kind of discontent against the government, it's palpable in the streets, and it's not here. There is no air of revolution whatsoever. I just can't see it happening.
Okay, Catherine, thank you. Tererai, you want to say something?
Yeah, well, Robert Mugabe has a tight grip. I think that the regime has a tight grip on the population that is there right now. In a country where you can't even do a successful stay away, you know, people can't even stay home because they're being forced to go out. How are you going to send them out? There's a way that they've structured. There are only two main roads that lead into Harare, for example, and for you to get to town or to get to some location, you have to pass through those two main roads. And people know that these guys shoot. There's an element of fear that exists, and I think they have a tight grip. There's soldiers everywhere from what you hear. So who's going to, while looking at uniforms on every street corner, go out and try to, you know, do something?
Yeah, could I just add that? Sorry, just because it's been here, it's absolutely true that every street corner in Harare at the moment there are uniforms. There are riot police, there are soldiers, there are police. You can't imagine how anyone could just assemble a group of people with the kind of security presence we're looking at.
Add to that, I know that Jenny Williams, she constantly, certainly when I speak to her, complains that the MDC don't support them, and in fact they undermine them when they do those demonstrations, which I find very surprising.
Okay, actually, well, that neatly sort of helps us to move on to another aspect of this, which is the reporting of the Zimbabwe crisis. I mean, I think people up here might think you've been rather harsh, actually, you know, given that we've heard what happened to Jonathan Clayton and Bevan and people who did try to report it and ended up in a police cell. Let me come back to you. Do you think you know, there's lots of reporting still to be done on Zimbabwe? Is it still the case, do you think, that it's worth taking that risk for those people who don't get accredited, and can they report well?
Well, I think Catherine's going to have to answer that question at a certain point, but I'll start out from the perspective of somebody who's been in there both legally and illegally. Being in there legally gave me enough cover to be able to do the job as well as I possibly could. But even at that, don't be fooled. I didn't have the time nor the capacity to be able to get out into the countryside and tell the stories of the people who were living out there, which is a different reality than living inside the cities in Zimbabwe. I couldn't get down to Bulawayo and talk to women of Zimbabwe Arise and cover a demonstration down there. Even if we could stay in there for a few weeks, we would only get a snapshot of what is going on inside there. And the government knows that, and that's why most journalists get turned down for accreditation, and those who do get such short periods of time inside the country. When I was in there before, not at the invitation of the government, everything we did was smash and grab, and we had to do it that way because we're not print reporters. We have to take out microphones, we have to take out cameras, so we had to act stealthily and be able to get little bits and pieces of what was going on. So if you are frustrated with the level of coverage that the country is getting now, believe me, the media who want to cover this story are every bit as frustrated as you are, if not more. I wish I was back inside there right now, but our accreditation expired. We still haven't got an official answer on whether they're actually going to extend our accreditation. In fact, we were told by the Deputy Information Minister that we should just go and sit by the pool in our hotel to wait for an answer. We thought that wasn't the best idea. We actually decided to leave, and we're trying to get back in, and we hope that we will get back in.
Could I just ask the same question in a slightly different way, coming from a television perspective? What do you think about, there was ITV, the BBC and Sky, all of them reporting from inside the country, as we said, but quite often it was inside a compound, and there were limitations. One or two of our reporters did get out, make sort of surreptitious trips into the streets and shoot from cars and so on, shoot camera work from cars and so on. Any feelings on whether that helps or not, or is it just about scoring television points? There was some suggestions actually from some of the email traffic that the BBC gets, and you can imagine it gets literally thousands and thousands of these kind of messages, that there was a sense in which the MDC was kind of taken for granted. And curiously, we had some people saying, we don't like Robert Mugabe, but you're not doing a very good job at explaining why some people, at any rate, still kind of support him, and why he has perhaps a dwindling, but nonetheless has a constituency. I don't know if, Patrick, you can shed any light on that.
Yeah, I mean, I toured around a bit, Maribela land. I went up to Gweru, and I met quite a few ZANU supporters, and it is interesting. And you know, a lot of these, I suppose, it's a bit like French resistance comes to power and then goes very bad, and people can't quite get over the fact that it was the French resistance that are still, you know, they're there. And I think there's a sort of a legacy of the liberation struggle, which has been going up until now. And when you talk to people, it's beyond an argument. People are not saying, you know, no one's supporting ZANU and saying the economy is right. They're just saying we don't believe Tsvangirai and his British friends are going to fix it. I mean, that's how the argument has become so polarized. And I think it is a failure of a lot of our international reporting. We haven't really got into that, or we got into you know, any sort of analysis of what's going on within ZANU, because certainly ZANU is splintering. There are factions within ZANU, understanding those, and I think in terms of what's going to happen next, the divisions within the MDC and the divisions within ZANU and what Makoni and Majuro and these characters represent, and taking the way forward, I mean, it might help people to understand what's at stake. It's not as sort of binary as a lot of the reporting makes out.
Tererai, quickly, and then you turn the hat.
Yeah, I just want to make a point here that sometimes I listen to us talking about this whole situation in Zimbabwe, and we lose sight of one thing. You know, your Makonis came and went, your Mtambaras came and went, elections came and... What Mugabe is doing here is plain and simple, and I think if we look at it any other way, we're lost. The guy is trying to stall. Everything is a delay tactic. You know, they try to go to court, the MDC, to get the Electoral Commission to release the results. The court says, well, it's not within our jurisdiction. Well, let's decide on that first. Then they decide on that. Then they go back to court. Okay, it's within your jurisdiction. Is it urgent? Okay, let's decide on that. Then they go back to another court date to decide if it's urgent. Mugabe lost the election. Now he's stalling. It's a delay tactic. All of these things are not... And we'll discuss them seriously and analyze this and that and this and that. We have a dictator who just doesn't want to leave, period.
You're very happy to sit, you know, get up on Skype and say that MDC doesn't have a plan A, but he reads the Times every day, and you've never said that in your reporting.
That's an opinion, and my reporting is an opinion.
Okay, we'll leave it at that. Thank you. Is there a movement in exile, if you like, in the sense in which perhaps we saw it in South Africa? What is it, 3 to 4 million people outside the country? I don't know if, Gugu, whether you'd like to pick that up. Is there a movement in exile?
No, not that I know of. You know, this is one of the things that is quite puzzling about Zimbabwe. A lot of the people who have left Zimbabwe, particularly the middle-class people, just don't want to be involved. You know, they've moved on as far as they're concerned, and that's it. But, you know, that's true also.
Well, but since you say that, why should that be? Because there are lots of exile communities, lots of people who leave the country of their birth because they don't like what's going on, but then do get involved. I mean, the South African case, again, being the classic example, but there are others, the Burmese case. I mean, there's quite a community of exiles here in London.
It's puzzling, I don't know. I mean, I think the middle class in Zimbabwe has taken a very long time to get involved. Even now, you know, there are people who are still, you know, sitting on the fence in various ways.
Quickly, Tererai.
Yeah, I think even before this whole crisis started, a lot of Zimbabweans wanted to leave in the first place. I remember coming back from New York, trying to settle back in Zimbabwe in 1998. Everyone I was meeting was always telling me how envious they are of people who had lived outside the country. And many families were trying to leave just to go find educational opportunities and jobs anyway. And this crisis has sent a lot of people out, and there are many who don't want to go back. I see them every day applying for citizenship. They're settling down. They've brought their kids over. The wife comes next, and the whole family's here.
All right. But what, on the delaying tactics of Mugabe, that what he's trying to do is delay the elections long enough and far enough into December, when Morgan Tsvangirai's term as leader expires, and he won't be eligible then to stand for election.
Well, I think he will keep delaying even beyond that.
Can you address that? Do you know anything about that?
No, that's one tactic I haven't heard about. But I think he wants to delay till he dies.
Can anybody shed any light on that? I'm sorry, we failed you. Okay, yeah, I did one of those stories in the 4 days I was down there. I did a similar group in Joburg at the Methodist Church.
Yeah, and I've been to the Methodist Church too, and I also in December spent. Well, I spent 5 days up on the border with Messina, with people where people come across and they cross the Limpopo River and they risk being attacked by crocodiles or by gangs who are sitting on the other side. They take enormous risks just to get into South Africa. That's how a lot of them get there. It is desperation that is driving them, and most of them end up in Joburg. Some of them move on to Cape Town, but they are a desperate, desperate bunch, and I know you met a lot of them too when you were in Joburg.
Thank you. Catherine, I don't know if you helped there. We've had Dan Smiley here just saying that he thinks it's completely rubbish, absolute rubbish, to hear someone say, that it is difficult to report inside Zimbabwe.
Who said that?
Zan Smiley.
Okay. Hi, Zan. I'm here to do my job for me. It's very difficult. You can't, even as a print reporter, you can't take out a notebook. You can't be seen to be committing journalism in any public way. You can be careful. You can get the story. You can speak to people being affected. I have managed to do that. It's not some great post. It doesn't make me incredibly brave. It's possible. It's just not easy. My key concern, to be honest, I mean, we've been in situations in the countryside where it's not just the police that might arrest you and bang you up and have done to you what Jonathan Clayton had done to him, but it's also the war veterans. I mean, we've had some very close calls with them. So you're sort of running this gauntlet between different forces. But the thing that concerns me the most is if I simply pitch up in the countryside where I know things happen and I go and speak to people, I'm putting them at risk. And they will get visited by the Central Intelligence Office, who, by the way, have followed us. They have tried to ram our car off the road. So, you know, it's not a walk in the park.
Okay, thank you.
We do use Zimbabwean journalists, maybe not directly on the air, but for background. It's risky for them to be on the air using their own names and their own identities to report for us as well. Pardon me? Yes, I know, and they have done in the past. But we do use other people inside Zimbabwe, and we have in the past and we will in the future. But the best thing for Canadians is to hear from other Canadian journalists inside the country reporting back to them on what they view being inside the country. And that's always been the way it is reporting around the world. What do you exist for as a network if not to have your own reporters, your own eyes and ears on the ground? If you can't get there, yes, we do use people inside. There isn't a reluctance about doing that.
Okay, I want to try and move away from the whole journalism business, actually, because not least because at the beginning I said there were several other themes. What about this business of the Africa that Zan talked about? Does this crisis tell us as much about the weakness of the African Union and African states as it does about Robert Mugabe?
No, I think that's to misunderstand what the nation of ZANU and the military. I mean, they're one and the same thing. You know, it's a liberation movement. People fought for their liberation from colonial rule. They then formed a political party as part of that struggle, and they're intertwined. All that's happened is that he's been unable to pay the top echelon of the military, so he's put them in all these jobs, so within the bureaucracy, and given them farms, and it's getting tighter and tighter and tighter. But if they could see a political alternative to which to them is acceptable, they jump tomorrow. But you don't need a military takeover. It's already there.
Yeah, we've got about 3 minutes. There's one area, actually, I will come to you, but one area I don't think we have looked at, perhaps not enough. We've talked about SADC, we've talked about the region. What we haven't done, and we've talked about Zuma, curiously, but what we haven't done is talk about Thabo Mbeki. I mean, as an individual, this man who came from this exile movement of the ANC, who knows all about opposition and who for so many years called for the outside world to do something about South Africa. Firstly, have any of the panel got anything to say about Thabo Mbeki by trying to explain what his lack of action?
I think a lot of it boils down to the man, Thabo Mbeki. You know, if you look at what happened to him at Polokwane, you know, the moment when he went and talked about, you know, Gini coefficients and so on, when people wanted him out. And of course, the way in which he responded to the AIDS, the pressure on their AIDS policy, I think that he almost takes, you know, pride in not yielding to popular pressure, and you see that even in some of the editorials that he used to write in the ANC weekly and so on. So I think there's an element of that. He just digs in, and he did try and explain this thing about the crisis and why he did try.
It wasn't a crisis.
No, but he then, you know, tried to explain the semantics of it, what he was responding to. So he's very particular in that way. But then I think there are also other things that people have said about his relationship with the people in Harare. That you know, following ZANU-PF coming into power in the 80s, Thabo Mbeki was himself responsible for building a relationship with ZANU-PF, because ANC wasn't aligned to ZANU-PF; they were aligned to ZAPU, and Thabo Mbeki was the person who built that relationship. And if you read Mark Gavissa's biography of Thabo Mbeki, he describes how Thabo Mbeki built this relationship, and also how when Thabo Mbeki then handed over to Chris Hani, Chris Hani seemed to have damaged that relationship in some sense, and Thabo Mbeki was quite unhappy with that. But also how just, you know, people like Mugabe took care of Thabo Mbeki. There is also the element that, and Zimbabwe took, you know, some hits from actually helping the ANC. The South African government was attacking Zimbabwe in various ways. And the other thing that many historians say is that they believe, the South African government, the ANC, believe that Mugabe helped ease the transition in South Africa, in the sense that he appeared to be conciliatory to whites and so on. And, you know, that helped South African white people to believe that perhaps an ANC, a black government, would be possible. So they do feel some sense of gratitude, and perhaps this explains why he won't at least condemn him in public. But many of the accounts that I've heard, which are quite credible, are that Mbeki doesn't like Mugabe, really, you know, and he really is trying to do something about it. But that, you know, he's just ineffective.
Yeah, just remains for me to say, Catherine, if you can still hear me, thank you very much. Keep up the good work, and well done. Patrick, Laura, Gugu, and Tererai, thank you all for being here. Thank you for coming along to this Frontline Club meeting on Zimbabwe. Thank you.